There, it's Lara here. Welcome to your weekly astrology forecast. Today is December 2nd, 2020, and in this video, I am going to talk mostly about the total solar eclipse that's coming up in Sagittarius on December 14th. So if you watch these videos all the time, first off, thank you so much. I appreciate your support and your engagement. But you know that normally I do Wednesday to Wednesday, right? So I talk about what's coming up. But every once in a while, I stretch that out. And in this case, the week that we're in right now, speaking Wednesday to Wednesday, is it's a bit more quiet than some weeks have been. But don't let that fool you, because we have a lot coming up in as we approach that eclipse and the conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn on the solstice, right? So I decided today to talk about the eclipse, and then next week, talk about some other things that are happening, and probably that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction. I'm also in the middle of writing a blog post about that because it's a big event and there's lots to say about it. And I had excuse me, I had made set an intention to do more writing publicly. I mean, I kind of do a lot of that on Facebook, truth be told, but in terms of a more formal pattern of writing, because I hadn't written on my blog in a very long time. So I did that a while back around the equinox, but I haven't posted anything there since. So I'm in the process of writing a post about that. So stay tuned for that. I'll share it on Facebook, probably Instagram, but you can always just go to my website, to the blog, and you'll see when it's there. All right. So we have, as I'm recording this today, the moon is moving from Gemini into Cancer, right? So we just had the lunar eclipse, full moon in Gemini, full moon lunar eclipse in Gemini on the 30th of November. And so here we sit in this sort of, bardo between eclipses. And we are now in the waning, when the moon moves into Cancer, we enter the waning moon phase, right? So we've had that full moon where the energy is all amplified and even more so because it was an eclipse. And now the moon starts to shrink in size from our perception right here on Earth. And so as the moon wanes, our energy also tends to wane, right? And so it's a time for kind of wrapping things up, not for amping things up. That's from new moon to full moon, what that energy is most beneficial for, right? So it's a time for wrapping things up, tying up loose ends, taking a step back a little bit at this stage of the game, and kind of being in that, okay, we've had this culmination, right, at the full moon, and so we're kind of just riding that wave right now. And you'll notice, if you're tuned in, that your own energy, if you're a really sort of a lunar person, somebody that's really tuned into the energy of the moon, you'll notice that your energy waxes and wanes, right? With the moon's waxing and waning. And so oftentimes I see people on social media around the time leading up to a full moon, people will be talking about, they're feeling agitated, or they're not sleeping. They're up in the middle of the night, this kind of thing. And it's often at that time of the month when we have the full moon. And then as we get closer to the end of the cycle, right, and we enter and the moon wanes and we are just approaching the new moon, so when the moon is in her dark phase, then oftentimes you'll notice that you're a lot more tired, kind of dragging your ass a little bit, that sort of thing, maybe needing the extra cup of coffee or what have you, right? So that's the way that goes. And if you have yet to grab my free guide to working with the moon, that's still over there on my website. If you're wanting that, you can click the link below to go get it for yourself. So here we sit. right? Moon changing from Gemini to Cancer today. You know, when we may feel a little bit sort of more like nesting, or maybe connecting with our tribe in some way, with the moon in Cancer. And then on Friday, the moon shifts into Leo. So we have a bit of a a flashy Leo moon weekend kind of thing. And then she will move into Virgo on Sunday. So that's where the moon is at. We also have Mercury. I spoke briefly about this in last week's video, but Mercury just shifted into Sagittarius yesterday from Scorpio. So you can, you may have sensed that shift in terms of feeling a little bit perhaps more optimistic in your thoughts and communications, perhaps a little bit more willing to say your piece, to share your philosophy, to have those sort of bigger picture conversations, that sort of thing. But I talked a little bit about that in last week's video. Last week's video, incidentally, is still very relevant because I talked about the eclipse, right? And so, as I said, the next 2 weeks we're in this waning moon phase and sitting between the eclipses until we hit the total solar eclipse on December 14th, which is a new moon. Solar eclipses are always new moons. And that's at 23 degrees of Sagittarius, a mutable fire sign. But when we're talking about eclipses, this is why I'm saying, last week's video is still very relevant. Eclipses unfold in pairs, right? Over the course of about 18 months. And those 18-month cycles are part of larger cycles and much longer cycles, right? The story is sort of always unfolding and never really ending. And this particular eclipse story, the Gemini-Sagittarius axis and family of eclipses, when we're talking about the 18-month time frame, it began on June 5th with a lunar eclipse, so a full moon eclipse in Sagittarius, right? So we're going to have a new moon eclipse in Sagittarius on the 14th, but we had a full moon, so a lunar eclipse in Sagittarius on June 5th. And so this family of eclipses, when we're talking about the Gemini-Sagittarius axis, because Gemini and Sag are opposite each other, right? And if you remember, I talked about the fact that what makes an eclipse is when we've got the moon in close proximity to the nodes. So anyway, when we have eclipses in Gemini and Sag, it tends to bring up themes of communication and perspectives and ideologies and information and, information exchange and connectivity, things like learning, travel, mobility, all of these things, right? Truth, philosophies versus facts sort of thing, wisdom versus knowledge, and so those are the overarching themes that tend to happen. And then those themes will play out in particular areas of life for each of us, because it depends where Gemini and Sagittarius sit in our chart, right? So if you know your chart, you will know that. And then because these particular eclipses are in mutable signs, Gemini and Sagittarius are mutable signs, as are Virgo and Pisces. Eclipses on this axis test our ability to adapt, right? And adapt to an ever sort of shifting situation. That's mutability. So the eclipses that happened, the eclipse that happened on November 30th is part of this story. The eclipse that started this particular 18-month story that happened back in June, on June 5th, is part of this story as well, right? And now we have the next chapter in the story happening on the 14th of December with the eclipse in Sagittarius. So, And incidentally, the last eclipses that we had on that axis, I may have mentioned this in last week's video, but I don't remember, were on October. So the eclipse, that 18 sort of month eclipse cycle went from October 14th, 2001 to April 14th, 2003. And of course, you know, it sort of reverberates out on either side of those dates. And then we also had an eclipse cycle in Gemini Sag from March 4th to 2011 to August 29th, 2012. So you can look back to those time frames, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit here. But what I want to say before I do that is, well, actually what I want to do is I'm going to show you the chart right now, real quick, before we go any further. And yeah, here's me and my paper analog system that I'm still working with. Anyway, I was just going to say something about moving into Aquarius. Maybe I'll get more tech going here for you. But right now, this is still where I'm at. So, all right, I want to point out the eclipse. Here we have the moon at the time of this eclipse on December 14th in Sagittarius. And oh, I just realized something. No, I was animating the chart and I have the wrong chart to show you. So this is okay though. I'm going to use it because I don't want to stop the video. So this is actually the day before the eclipse is happening on December 13th. So at that point, we've got the moon already in Sagittarius, right? Getting closer to the south node in Sagittarius. And we have the sun also in Sagittarius, pretty much at the eclipse point, right? So the eclipse is happening at 23 degrees and there's the sun at 22 degrees. So when the moon catches up to the sun, they'll both be at 23 degrees of Sagittarius and we will have that eclipse. And you can see that we've also got Mercury in Sagittarius there, who's playing a role I'm going to talk about. We've got Neptune in Pisces over here, who's also, you know, playing a role in this time frame in general. But I'll talk about that. We have Mars in Aries, and 20 degrees, but moving closer. And then we've got Venus here in Scorpio, conjunct asteroid Juno, the partnership asteroid, making a supportive conversation. And Mars, I want to say Mars is making a supportive conversation to this eclipse. It's called a trine. We're going to talk a little bit about that. So those are the pieces I want to show you. And there's the south node, or the north node, I'm sorry, in Gemini here, right? Where we had the eclipse on the 30th. But now the moon, because the moon moves quite quickly, so the moon has moved up to Sagittarius already at this point. All right, so this is actually for December 13th, like I said, and the eclipse is happening on the 14th. I forgot to take the chart back before I printed it out, or move it forward, rather. So anyway, but that gives you an idea of what's going on. So leading up to the eclipse, the reason that I did that on the chart, because, the day before this eclipse happens, Mercury in Sagittarius that I pointed out to you there, Mercury's now in Sag, right, will be in an exact square to Neptune in Pisces. And if you recall in last week's video, if you watched it, I talked about the square, Neptune squaring the nodes of the moon, right? And playing a role, and Neptune had just stationed direct, playing a role in that eclipse. So Neptune is part of the bigger story here. And Mercury square Neptune is this, I actually have this configuration in my birth chart, so I'm familiar, with the energy. But Mercury wants to focus, Neptune not so much, like, to put it simply, that's the way that works. But, Mercury wants the details, Neptune wants to dream about the possibilities. Mercury wants to communicate with words and numbers and that sort of thing. And Neptune sort of prefers images, right? And the way I kind of see it, like, they connect on this level of symbol. and I don't know if other people feel that way about it, or other astrologers have that take on it, or other people that have this particular configuration in their chart feel that way. But it's interesting because I have this, I'm drawn to symbols, always have been, right? Like if you look around me, I have a lot of charts and things up that have different symbols on them. I have a chart that has the alchemical symbols and the, you know, of course, all the symbols of the planets and the signs and all of that. And I'm particularly drawn to sigil magic, which is the magic of, you know, that involves symbols, like this kind of thing. I've always doodled symbols. So it's weird because it occurred to me that I think this, like this Mercury Neptune in a square, it's like, this is where that have some common ground almost, I feel like. But in general, Mercury square Neptune can bring about, pardon me, some confusion, some disorientation, some misinformation, maybe even like delusion, but some sort of fuzzy communication, difficulty articulating, you know, your thoughts and feelings can sometimes happen, or it's like, or your, you know, the language can be quite poetic. I think of music, you know, when we're talking about this configuration as well. Music is a language, right? That sort of thing. But in general, you know, as we're leading into the eclipse and we've got Mercury square Neptune, it can be like this bit of a like, what just happened, or what's happening, or, you know, a bit of confusion or disorientation or misinformation, like I said. And then the moon catches up with the sun, 23 degrees Sagittarius, and we have that total solar eclipse. So that will be able to be seen in different, I can't remember, I should have written it down, in different places, not everywhere, but in some places in the world, you know, you can Google that if you're interested. But in general, the more total an eclipse is, the stronger it is. So the lunar eclipse we just had in Gemini was a partial eclipse. This one's total, you know, and so it's like the light of the sun is obstructed for a time, right? During a total solar eclipse. And so we get that sense again of, I used the analogy last week of like, you know, the light being turned off for a moment. And then when it comes back on, things are rearranged. Things look different. We have a new perspective somehow. We have new information, you know, or somebody has like, in the case of an eclipse on the south node, which is this eclipse, it's like somebody has taken something away and cleared out some space. You know, maybe if you think of this analogy of somebody turning off the light in a room, and there you are in the room, and they turn the light on, and it's like, you know, a piece of furniture is gone, and you're like, what? but I was attached to that furniture. And, you know, it's like, yeah, but now you have space for the new thing that you wanted, right? I mean, that's kind of a silly example, but it works. So that's the kind of energy that a eclipse on the south node has. And I feel like when I was looking at this eclipse chart, I noticed something that stuck out to me, and that is that there's no air in the chart. So there are no planets in air. Like if you look at the chart, I'm going to show this to you. I mean, we do have Pallas Athena just in Aquarius. But if you're looking at the traditional planets, you know, and even the outer planets, there are nothing in air. We've got the lonely old North Node sitting over there in Gemini, an air sign, but the North Node is actually a point in the sky. It's not actually a concrete object, right? So there's no air in the chart. And I was like, that is really interesting to me. And I thought, you know, all these images and metaphors and symbols came to mind, right? My Mercury square Neptune. And I got these, and sometimes just phrases will come in, or like song lyrics, or you know, quotes, or those kinds of things, or just images. And for me, it's like, I got this, or even sensations like this, like, it's like, and we're holding our breath for a moment. There's no air in the chart. It's like we're holding our breath and waiting to exhale, right? And to see what happens. And then when we do finally exhale, it's like whoosh, right? It's almost like this sense of putting bellows to a fire. You know, those things where you like squeeze them and they blow on the fire, and the fire, it puts oxygen on the fire to ignite, you know, the spark. And it's kind of like, I feel like it has that energy. Or, you know, if that metaphor doesn't work for you, think about it as the stillness. If you've ever had this sensation of like the stillness that happens, that moment of stillness right before a huge lightning flash, it's kind of like that. Or, you know, another thing that came to mind is like, because we know what's been going on in Capricorn, right? This big restructuring and the dismantling, you know, which is not over yet, but this sort of dismantling of a lot of patriarchal structures, right? It's like this last gasp almost of, you know, the patriarchy in some way, shape, or form. And so those are some metaphors to play with for you. But I do really feel like I get this sense, you know, it's like holding our breath, no air in the chart. And at the time of this eclipse, I showed you on the chart, the sun and the moon are trining Mars. A trine is a conversation of support, right? So Mars is in a supportive conversation with this eclipse. Mars is now direct in Aries at about 20 degrees. And Mercury also in Sagittarius, close to the eclipse, is also trining Mars. And so there is, you know, this support. There's a trine is ease and flow. Mars is action and will and drive. Mercury is thinking and perception and communication and, you know, mobility. So it's like we have, you know, this is giving us the sort of oomph or the drive to take on this new beginning, right? And perhaps a renewed sense of clarity with the Mercury piece there, and optimism and inspiration, right? Sagittarius is about those key words, and as a mutable fire sign. So there's that going on. We also have Neptune and Vesta squaring the nodes still, which I talked about last week. So I'm not going to belabor that point, but just to recap in sort of a sentence, I talked about that as being sort of staying awake. And you know, Neptune's now direct, and focusing on what you're devoted to, right? That's the Vesta piece, and holding compassionate space as we move from the past, right? South node, to the future, north node. We also have Venus in a conjunction with Juno, asteroid Juno. I showed you that on the chart, in Scorpio. And they are in sextile with the Jupiter, Saturn, and to a lesser degree, Pluto in Capricorn. And so a phrase that came to mind when I was thinking about this was blessed partnership. So that, and a sextile is a conversation of opportunity, right? And support. And so this may be something that sort of gives us a clue that we've got some help to ease the bumpy changes that have been happening in Capricorn, and maybe some partnership opportunities. And then we also have Chiron stationing direct the day after this eclipse. So Chiron in Aries is stationing direct on the 15th. And this points to, you know, whenever a planetary body stations, the energy is amplified. You've heard me say that before. And so, you know, this points to the need for healing being highlighted. And it reminded me of the Leonard Cohen lyric, "There's a crack in everything, that's where the light gets in." I think that's it. And so it's like, I feel like this emphasis on Chiron here is where we are being called to heal the intense polarization that has really come to the forefront in 2020, right? And so on all levels, you know, personally, collectively, in so many ways. And so Chiron is sort of drawing our attention to the need for healing. And that's going to be an ongoing theme, I'm sure. I also, of course, I didn't mention that this eclipse is happening on the day the Electoral College votes in the US. So more playing out in terms of that in election piece. So it'll be interesting, to see what transpires there. But last week I spoke to you quite a bit about Gemini, and I used the analogy of Gemini being this busy marketplace or airport or street corner, right? Where everybody's sort of trying to get your attention, and there's all kinds of information being exchanged and chit chat and this kind of thing. So Sagittarius across the sky from Gemini, right, sits on the same axis, but Sagittarius is more like the theater or the concert hall or the lecture hall or even the church. Or the sacred space, right? Where the information and the discussions and the ideas have been made sense of in some way in Sagittarius. So they've resulted in, a production or a movie or a sermon or some kind of ritual or a speech or a presentation or something like that, right? And so you can see how those two signs are sort of two sides of the same coin. And as I mentioned, this is a new moon on the South Node. So we've got things coming up to be released to make way for new beginnings. Eclipses in general are like this interplay of endings and beginnings and endings, right? And so, if you look, again, I'll just draw your attention. If you look to those eclipses that happened back in between 2001 and 2003, and then again, 2011, 2012, you can get a sense of what the themes were that were playing out for you. I mean, when I look back at my own life, very, very clear what was going on. I have Gemini in the 10th house, right? Public, career, all of that kind of thing. And then Sagittarius in the 4th house of home and family and roots. And Gemini is material security, and then, 10th house rather is material security. 4th house is more emotional security. And so there was a lot going on in my life over those time periods. And for example, way back in 2001, I decided to, it's a long story, but anyways, I had a business with a friend. We made soaps and all that kind of thing. And then I decided to, that we weren't making, big cash doing that by any stretch. So I decided to go to teacher's college. It had been something I had thought of for a long time. So I applied, I got in, and I went to teacher's college 2001. I graduated 2002 and then got my first full-time teaching job, right? So there's that piece and then some other things, but and there was a lot going on in my family at that point too. So that public-private life kind of, tension going on. And so that's just an example from my own life, but you can look to your own chart to the houses that Gemini and Sagittarius sit. And I'm going to get into that in 1 second here and talk about where this eclipse is falling for you. But I want to say before I do that, if you have significant markers, so, your rising sign, your sun, your moon, or a cluster of planets, or your nodes around the 23-degree Sagittarius mark, then, or the other mutable signs, 23 degrees of the other mutable signs, Gemini, Virgo, and Pisces, this is impacting you on a more personal level, right? So there is a reset happening in this area of life. But like I said, it's part of this bigger story that's been unfolding since June of this year and will continue to unfold until 2022 when this eclipse cycle ends. And then it's also connected to the themes that were highlighted for you during those past 2 eclipse seasons on the same axis that I gave you the dates for. So having said all of that and set the stage here, we're going to run through each of the 12 signs. We're dealing in these general forecasts with rising sign or ascendant, right? First and foremost. So if you know your rising sign, listen for that first. And then you can also listen for your sun and your moon sign, right? For added layers of information. This, in these general forecasts, I'm using whole sign houses. I've been really taking a real serious look at whole sign houses lately, but that's another story for another day. So right now, though, we're going to start with Sagittarius because this eclipse is happening in your first house, and that's the way I like to do things around here. I know most astrologers start with Aries and go to Pisces every time. I like to mix it up. Got a lot of mutable energy in my chart, but I also think it's more fair this way. But please listen to the introduction of this video, because if you just jump straight to this little snippet, it's not going to have context for you. So beginning with Sagittarius, all of this, all the details we've just been talking about, right? In terms of the eclipse families, and this particular eclipse for you is happening in your first house. It's happening in your sign. So this sense of having to let go of something or release something or purge something to make way for something new. This is ultimately a new moon eclipse, but it's sitting on the south node, which is about what we're releasing, what we're moving away from, the past, that kind of thing, right? And so for you, that has something to do with your overall self, your body, your well-being, your vitality, your appearance, your character in a sense, right? Like meaning how you project yourself out into the world, how the world perceives you, who you are out there in the world, sort of thing. And also your like your general personality and your overall appearance and that sort of thing, and sense of your physical body. So for you, Sagittarius, there is something transpiring here that is hitting the reset button in this area of life and is part of the larger story that's playing out, right? That we talked about in the intro. So that's for you. Next, we're moving on to Scorpio. Scorpio, for you, this eclipse is sort of hitting the reset button in your second house, right? And so we've got something coming up, something being released, let go of, purged, moved away from, because it's an eclipse on the south node to make way for new beginnings. And so the new beginnings and this larger eclipse story is, your second house is part of this. So themes like your own personal resources, your money, your time, your energy, the money you make from, your skills and talents, the job you do, and what you value, your sense of values, your sense of self-worth, what you place worth on, those kinds of things are all second house. So that's where there is this opportunity to have a new start, but something may be kind of removed or let go of, in order for that to happen in that area of life. So that's for you, Scorpio. Next, we've got Libra. Libra, the eclipse is happening in your third house. So for you, this is the reset button kind of being, pushed in relation to your immediate environment and, your immediate sphere and the people in it, your siblings, cousins, neighbors, community members, peers, that sort of thing, teammates. It can have very much to do with third house, can speak to your daily communications, learning and teaching, but more of a sort of basic level. This sense of commerce or, exchange of goods and services, things like exchange of ideas, all of that fits into the third house. Mobility to a certain degree, so this is where the eclipse is happening for you. And it's part of that bigger story that's playing out over these eclipses, right? Which I talked about in the introduction. So definitely listen to that. Next, we've got Virgo. So Virgo, for you, this eclipse is happening in your fourth house, right? So, excuse me. For you, this the endings and beginnings, fourth house, 10th house, but this one specifically in the fourth house, this eclipse on the south node, but it's a new moon. So something being released in this area of life, this fourth house area, I'm getting to it just a sec. And then, you know, to make way for something new. And your 4th house speaks to your sense of emotional security. It speaks to home, family, place of living, roots, ancestry. Parents, usually sort of the mother or the matriarchal figures, the more, you know, feminine figures in your life. So that's where the reset button is being hit in some way for you, Virgo. And again, part of the larger picture in terms of the eclipses, right? Which we talked about in the intro. Next, we've got Leo. The eclipse is hitting your 5th house. So this reset button for you, Leo, is happening in relation to your creative projects, your creative self-expression, your children or children that you're associated with or work with, any kind of issues around, you know, children, pregnancy, that sort of thing. Also your sense of, you know, what brings you pleasure and joy in life. So there's a reset button being hit here. It's part of the larger story that's playing out. But in order for something new to come in, something may be, you know, needing to be released. This is an eclipse on the South Node. Release, let go of, that sort of thing. So next we've got Cancer. So for you, Cancer, this eclipse is happening in your 6th house, which speaks to themes of health and illness, you know, routines, daily routines, checking off the ticky boxes, that your work you do on the day-to-day, whether that be paid or unpaid, your sort of relationship between unequals, like, you know, subordinates, people that are not on equal playing field. Pets can factor into the 6th house, this kind of thing, right? But very much about issues around daily routine, health, wellness, work, that sort of thing. And so for you, Cancer, the reset button is being hit here, right? And in order for something new to come in, something old needs to be released or purged or what have you, right? And so this is part of this larger story of eclipses that's playing out that began this time around back in June and will go all through to 2022. So listen to the intro for some details there. Next, we've got Gemini. Gemini, for you, the eclipse is happening in your 7th house of close personal relationships, right? Significant other, close family members, close friends. Also has to do with contracts and agreements, you know, this sort of thing. And so for you, Gemini, these are the themes that are being highlighted at the time of this eclipse, right? And it's an eclipse. It's a new moon eclipse. So something new, there's some new beginning on offer here, but because it's on the South Node, it's like something needs to be let go of, released, let go, or purged, that kind of thing, right? Eclipsed out, so to speak. And so, but this is all part of this larger story playing out that I talked about in the introduction. So those are the themes to look for you, Gemini. And next we have Taurus. Taurus, for you, the eclipse is hitting your 8th house. So the 8th house speaks to themes of other people's resources. So other people's time, money, energy. It speaks to your intimate sort of merging, you know, and connections with other people. It speaks to your psychological sort of state, you know, a psychological wounding and healing, that sort of thing. Issues around the occult. Occult just means hidden knowledge, that sort of thing. So, but very much, you know, can be about other people's resources, taxes, insurance, debt, loans, bursaries, inheritance, all of this sort of thing can play a role when we're talking about 8th house and other people's money in general. So Taurus, for you, there's something, a fresh start on offer here because this is a new moon eclipse. But in order for that to happen, something needs to go, right? Because it's an eclipse on the South Node. And this is part of that larger story playing out that I talked about in the intro. So definitely listen to that. Next, we've got Aries. So Aries, for you, the eclipse is happening in your 9th house of faraway people and places and what you learn from them. Sometimes long distance travel, sometimes it's armchair travel, you know, philosophies, belief system, higher learning and education, this sort of thing. So for you, Aries, there's a fresh start on offer here. But for that fresh start to happen, something in that area of life needs to be released or let go of or eclipsed out, right? And so, and this is all part of this larger story at play that I spoke about in the introduction. So that's for you, Aries. Next, we've got Pisces. Pisces, the eclipse for you is happening in your 10th house, very public house. It has to do with your career, your public reputation and persona, your relationship to authority, the legacy you wish to leave, these kinds of themes, right? And so for you, there is some fresh start on offer here, Pisces, which is part of the larger eclipse story playing out that I spoke about in the intro. But for that fresh start to happen, this is a south node eclipse. So something needs to be released, eclipsed out, let go of, that sort of thing, right? But that's the area of life that's really being highlighted for this eclipse, this particular eclipse for you. All right, next we've got Aquarius. Aquarius, for you, this Sagittarius eclipse is hitting your 11th house. So this speaks to the group, your friendship groups, networks, clubs, associations, humanitarian causes, these kinds of things, right? It also speaks to your hopes and dreams for the future and the people that can help you get there, you know, that are walking the same path as you, that want to help you, that sort of thing. And so for you, there is a new opportunity here for a fresh start. But in order for that to happen, something needs to let go of in this area of life, because this is a south node eclipse. So something needs to be purged, eclipsed out, let go of, you know, that sort of thing for you, Aquarius. And all part of the larger eclipse story, right, that's playing out that I talked about in the intro. So for sure, listen to the introduction. And last but not least, we've got Capricorn. Capricorn, woo, boy, what a year for you, right? We've got the eclipse happening in your 12th house, the Sagittarius eclipse, right? So it is happening in a place that has to do with what goes on behind closed doors. It has to do with things like how you spend time in rest and reflection and recuperation and recovery. It can have to do with things buried in the unconscious. It can have to do with our bad habits and, you know, the things we do that sabotage ourselves. Our connection to spirit and our spiritual wellness can also play a role here. And even places behind, you know, closed doors that are tucked away from the world, like hospitals and spiritual retreat centers and even like prisons, detention facilities, you know, rehab facilities, these kinds of things, right? So for you, Capricorn, there is the reset button is being hit in this area of life, but for something new to begin, something needs to be taken away or released or let go of, right? Because this is an eclipse on the south node. And all of this is part of the larger story at play. You know, this particular eclipse family began back in June and will go until 2020, January 2020. So this eclipse is a chapter in the larger story for all of us, including you, Capricorn, but it's hitting your 12th house this time. So that's all 12 signs, and I hope this was helpful to you. Stay tuned for that blog post on my website about the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction, and I will catch you next week, okay? So take good care. Let me know what's going on and how the eclipse vibes are treating you, all right? Tell me in the comments below. Bye-bye.